A warehouse worker fired for helping injured customer. 24 hours later, corporate jets arrive. In a busy warehouse on the outskirts of town, David worked endless hours, barely making ends meet to support his sick mother. His 10-year job paid little, but it was all he had. That rainy Tuesday morning, hearing the cry of pain from the loading area, David faced a choice that would cost him everything. An elderly customer lay injured, and company policy strictly forbade leaving his station, but his heart wouldn't let him turn away. In those few precious minutes of helping her, David lost the job that kept his family afloat. As he walked home in the rain that evening, shoulders heavy with worry, he had no idea that 3 sets of eyes had witnessed his sacrifice. 24 hours later, the quiet morning sky filled with the roar of approaching jets, carrying people who had seen something in David that would transform his world forever. David lived in a small apartment with his mother, who needed regular medical care. Their walls were bare, but their bond was strong. Every morning, he woke up at 4 a.m. to make her breakfast before his warehouse shift. The warehouse job wasn't much, but it paid the bills. David worked in the loading area, moving heavy boxes for 10 hours a day. His coworkers often rushed through their tasks, focused only on meeting quotas. That Tuesday morning started like any other. The rain made the loading dock slippery. Signs warned customers to be careful, but the weather kept getting worse. David noticed an elderly woman slowly making her way toward the customer pickup area. She carried a small receipt in her shaking hands. The wind whipped around her, making her unsteady on her feet. David watched from his station, feeling uneasy about her safety. "Ma'am, please be careful," he called out, but his voice was lost in the wind. Then it happened. Her foot slipped on the wet surface, and she fell hard onto the concrete. David heard her cry of pain. The rulebook was clear. Workers must stay at their stations during shifts. 3 warnings in his file meant one more mistake would cost him his job. His supervisor's voice rang in his head from yesterday's meeting. "Your station is your responsibility. Leave it, and you're done here." But the woman's pained sounds grew louder. Other workers turned away, pretending not to notice. David looked at his station, then at the fallen woman. His mother's face flashed in his mind. What if that was her, lying there alone? Without another thought, David ran to help. The woman clutched her hip, tears mixing with rain on her face. "Try not to move," he said softly. Kneeling beside her, he carefully helped her sit up, shielding her from the rain with his work jacket. "My name is David. Are you hurt badly?" The woman nodded, her hands trembling. David pulled out his phone and called for medical help. He stayed with her, holding his jacket over her head. The minutes ticked by slowly as they waited for the ambulance. From the corner of his eye, he saw his supervisor marching toward them. Mr. Peterson's face was red with anger. "David, get back to your station now." "Sir, she's hurt. I can't leave her alone in this rain," David replied. The woman gripped his hand tighter, frightened by the supervisor's harsh tone. "This is your final warning. David, get back now, or you're fired." Mr. Peterson's words cut through the rain. David looked at the scared woman, then back at his supervisor. "I'm sorry, sir, but I won't leave her." David's voice was quiet but firm. The woman squeezed his hand in gratitude. Mr. Peterson pulled out his clipboard. "Then you're terminated. Clear out your locker after the ambulance arrives." He stormed away, leaving them in the rain. The paramedics came soon after. As they helped the woman onto a stretcher, she reached for David's hand one last time. "Thank you, young man. You're an angel." David watched the ambulance drive away. His clothes were soaked, and his heart was heavy. That job was everything. How would he pay for his mother's medicine now? From a black car parked across the lot, 3 people watched the scene unfold. None of them said a word, but their eyes followed David as he walked to clear out his locker. David walked home in the rain, his work belongings in a small box. His hands shook as he dialed his mother's number. "Mom, I need to tell you something," his voice cracked. His mother listened quietly as he explained what happened. "You did the right thing, David. We'll figure something out," she said softly, but he heard the worry in her voice. That evening, David sat at their small kitchen table, looking through job listings on his old laptop. His mother's medicine bottles lined the counter, a reminder of what was at stake. Maybe the grocery store is hiring, his mother suggested, placing a cup of tea beside him. Before David could answer, his phone rang. An unknown number flashed on the screen. "Is this David?" a woman's professional voice asked. "This is Margaret Wells from Wells Industries. We'd like you to come in for a meeting tomorrow morning." David's heart skipped. Wells Industries was one of the biggest companies in the country. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm just a warehouse worker," he replied. "No mistake, Mr. David. A car will pick you up at 9 a.m. The address is already being sent to your phone." The call ended before he could ask more questions. His mother watched him with curious eyes. "What was that about?" David shook his head, confused. "I'm not sure. Some big company wants to meet me tomorrow." That night, David couldn't sleep. He checked his phone repeatedly, making sure the message was real. The address belonged to the local airport's private terminal. Morning came quickly. At exactly 9 a.m., a black car pulled up outside their apartment. The driver opened the door for David, who felt out of place in his best shirt and old dress pants. As they drove to the airport, David noticed 3 private jets landing. Their silver bodies gleamed in the morning sun. The car headed straight toward them. "We're here, Mr. David," the driver announced, stopping near the largest jet. A group of people in business suits stood waiting. David recognized one face immediately. It was the elderly woman from yesterday, but she wasn't in pain anymore. She stood tall, smiling warmly at him. Beside her were 2 men in expensive suits, watching David with intense interest. "Welcome, David," the elderly woman smiled. "I'm Catherine Wells, owner of Wells Industries." David's mouth went dry. He'd helped the CEO of a billion-dollar company. "Please, come aboard," she gestured toward the jet. David followed, his worn shoes clicking on the metal steps. The interior was more luxurious than anything he'd ever seen. Catherine sat across from him. "Yesterday, you lost your job helping me. Not many people would make that choice." Her eyes were kind but serious. The 2 men joined them. "Meet my sons, Robert and James. They watched everything unfold yesterday." Catherine touched David's hand. "We've been looking for someone like you." "Someone like me?" David's voice was barely a whisper. Robert leaned forward. "Someone with true character, who does the right thing when nobody's watching." James opened a folder. "We checked your background, David. 10 years at that warehouse. Taking care of your mother. Never missing a day of work." He paused. "Until yesterday. We're expanding our company's community outreach division," Catherine explained. "We need someone who understands struggle, shows compassion, and leads by example." David's hands trembled slightly. "I don't have any experience with corporate work." Catherine smiled. "You have the most important qualification, a good heart." Robert slid a contract across the table. "We want you to head our new division. Full benefits, including complete medical coverage." He pointed to the salary figure. David stared at the number. It was more money than he'd make in 5 years at the warehouse. His eyes filled with tears. "My mother's medical bills will be taken care of," Catherine finished. "Starting today, we also have a position for you at our main office. No more heavy lifting in the rain." "Why me?" David asked softly. Catherine's eyes met his. "Because yesterday, when everyone else looked away, you saw me as a person, not a problem. That's exactly who we need." David thought about his mother, about their struggles, about the chance to help others who were struggling too. His vision blurred with tears. The 3 Wells family members waited patiently as David wiped his eyes. Outside the jet's window, the morning sun broke through the clouds. David signed the contract with shaking hands. "When do I start?" Catherine smiled. "Right now. But first, let's go get your mother." The car ride home felt like a dream. David called his mom. "Can you be ready in 10 minutes? Some people want to meet you." His voice trembled with joy. When they pulled up, his mother stood waiting in her worn dress. Her eyes widened at the sight of the luxury car. David helped her in, squeezing her hand tight. "Mrs. David," Catherine greeted warmly. "Your son saved my life yesterday. Now, let me show you how we plan to change yours." She handed over medical insurance cards. David's mother started crying when she saw them. No more choosing between medicine and food. David whispered. She hugged him, tears soaking his shirt. The car took them to Wells Industries' main office. A modern building stretched toward the sky. Inside, employees stopped to watch their group pass. They entered a large office with city views. "This is yours now, David," Robert said. "Your team starts Monday. First project, creating programs for struggling families." James pointed to another door. "And through there is your mother's new job, if she wants it. Our employee assistance department needs someone with a kind heart." David's mother covered her mouth in surprise. "Me? But I haven't worked in years because of my health." Catherine touched her shoulder gently. "Flexible hours, full benefits, and a chance to help others facing similar struggles. Your experience is valuable to us." Catherine's words made both tear up again. "One more thing," Robert added. He handed David another set of keys. "Your new apartment is near the office. 2 bedrooms, fully furnished." David looked at his mother, seeing hope replace worry on her face for the first time in years. "Thank you isn't enough," he managed to say. Catherine shook her head. "You showed true kindness without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of person we want in our company family." Outside the office windows, the same warehouse where David had worked yesterday was visible in the distance. But now, instead of marking his limits, it reminded him of the moment that changed everything. 3 months later, David stood in front of 50 new employees. His suit fit perfectly now, but his heart remained the same. "Welcome to Wells Community Care," he smiled. His program had already helped hundreds of families. Today, they were opening 5 new centers across the city, places where struggling people could find support. His mother worked down the hall, her health improving each week. She ran a support group for families dealing with medical hardships. Her story gave others hope. Every morning, David walked through the lobby where photos hung on the wall. They showed people whose lives the program had touched. Each face reminded him of that rainy day. Catherine visited often, watching proudly as David's department grew. "Remember when you asked why we chose you?" she said one day. "Look around. This is why." He thought about Mr. Peterson, his old supervisor. Last week, the warehouse had applied to partner with Wells Community Care. David approved their application personally. "Some people measure success by what they get," David told his team. "We measure it by what we give." The words came from his heart, just like that choice in the rain. His mother joined him for lunch each day. They sat by the window, sometimes looking at the warehouse in the distance. "Life is funny," she would say. "One moment of kindness changed everything." That evening, David visited one of their new centers. A young woman was helping an elderly man with his paperwork. She looked up, smiling. "I almost got fired last month for helping a customer. Then I found this job." David nodded, understanding perfectly. He touched the Wells Industries pin on his suit. It reminded him that kindness, even when it seems costly, has power beyond measure. As he drove home, David passed the warehouse loading dock. The rain was falling again, but this time he smiled. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful changes. Love this story? Tap that like button and subscribe to Life Story for more. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word in the comments.